We're about to begin the service for Mr. Harry Flaxman. Just as a gentle reminder, folks, if you have a cell phone with you, to please place it in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. The services will be conducted by Rabbi Amanda Green from Chicago Sinai Congregation, but we will begin the service with military honors from the United States Army Corps.
death has taken our beloved Harry Flaxman. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there's lamentation. In their tears, there's loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Harry's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for his companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. I invite you to open your pamphlet and to join me in the words of the 23rd Psalm. The 23rd Psalm has been used for generations to offer comfort and support to those who are mourning. Please join with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. L'kol zaman be'et. For everything there is a season, Ecclesiastes taught. A time for every experience under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to discard. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. Friends, we've come here today to remember someone who lived not only a full life, but someone who lived a wonderful life. In his 93 years, Harry knew joy and he knew love. We who are here today gather with love and remembrance and with great sadness as we mourn Harry Flaxman's death and we remember his life. There was much that brought joy to Harry in his life, and none were more important to him than his family. He loved and was loved by so many. To his beloved wife of 61 years, Barbara, and his BFF. To his children, to Susan and to Ken. To his daughter-in-law of blessed memory, Lara. To his grandchildren, Rachel, Stephen, and Benjamin, who is with us via live stream. His nephew, Max. And his wonderful, wonderful caretakers, Russell and Sam. And of course, Sherlock, the dog. we turn to all of you today, and we offer you as much love and support as we can muster as we walk with you through the valley of the shadow of death. As I sat with Barbara and Susan and Ken yesterday to learn more about Harry's life, I first asked, "Tell me, when was Harry born?" And without missing a beat, Barbara replied, "Well, that's the first question." Because while Harry Flaxman was born either May 30th, 1928, the day he put a birthday candle in his cake, or according to legal documents, June 7th, 1928. Either way, he was born in Brooklyn to his parents, Janice and Murray. He had a close relationship with his younger brother, Larry, as well as all of the cousins who lived in their very Jewish neighborhood. The family together would spend summers out in the country house in New Jersey. After attending Lincoln High School, Harry went off to college at RPI. At graduation, it was the time where they told people to look to the left and look to the right, that only one would get a job. Well, being 1951, Harry didn't have to worry too much about getting hired because he was drafted into the Army. Harry served in Korea for 2 years during the conflict. Being an engineer, he initially served as a truck driver and then eventually transferred to work on water purification. Harry didn't talk much about his years in Korea, though there were a few anecdotes he would share from time to time, like how they would trade liquor for water and how he hated kimchi. In 1953, Harry returned to Brooklyn for a short while before finding a job at Domino Sugar in Boston. The move to Boston was a positive one and a special time to live close to his brother Larry, who was studying at Harvard. Harry lived in Boston until a new job opportunity opened in Lockport, New York, near Niagara Falls. At that time, Harry decided to rent a room from a nice Jewish family that was living in Niagara Falls. He had asked the family for a recommendation for a dentist, and sure enough, they referred him to Dr. Rovner. Dr. Rovner came home from work and shared with his children that he invited this nice Jewish man in town over for dinner. And the rest, they say, is history. That was the dinner where Dr. Rovner introduced Harry to his daughter, Barbara. Harry and Barbara had an instant connection, but 6 feet tall Harry swore he would never date a short girl. And it was while Barbara was on a trip to Winnipeg with her cousins and they were trying to set her up with other eligible Jewish men that Harry was sending letters to Barbara and swept her away. The two married overlooking the falls in 1960, though I'm told he nearly missed walking down the aisle as he was watching The Untouchables moments before. 2 years later, Susan was born, and then 4 years after that, Ken. The family moved to Cranford, New Jersey, so that Harry could go into business with his father. It was there that Susan and Ken grew up. At this time, instead of me talking about Susan and Ken's childhood, I'm going to invite them to share their own words and memories of their father. Susan will speak first, followed by Ken.
Thank you, Rabbi Green. That was very nice. Hi, everybody. And hello to anyone who's watching on streaming. Thanks for watching, and thank you for being there. I've never done this before, so I'm gonna give it a go. My dad was a quiet but fun, and his smile and quirky sense of humor lit my world. From the first time I can remember to my very last day with him, his sometimes slightly odd sense of humor always made me laugh. Pretty sure I inherited that from him. We had private, goofy jokes about so many things. He also made sure I could run a sewing machine and thread a needle on the first time every try, a skill I maintain to this day. He loved my mom From the depth of his heart, they truly were soulmates. Together, the two of them were a force of nature. Together, there wasn't anything they couldn't do. And their love and commitment for each other for 61 years can be an example to us all. They lived, they traveled, and they loved. Back when Ken and I were in school, and my mom wanted to start a new career in computers, my dad had her back every minute. And with their own strength together and the support of my dad, she was able to succeed beyond her dreams. He supported my dreams too. Not many parents get to hear or necessarily want to hear that their child's chosen ambition is to write comic books for a living. Dad told me to go and do it. I knew he would be proud of me, and he was. So when I achieved my dream of working for Marvel, he was interested in all the details. He wanted to know how the comics were written and put together and drawn and published. He also let me live at home because I was commuting to Manhattan on the salary of a very lowly assistant editor, which was very little. Dad taught me a love of reading from a very young age. He was the Holmes to my Watson. We shared a lifelong love of that legendary consulting detective, starting when I was old enough to understand what the stories were about. Mind, he wasn't reading them to me from a book. Nope, my dad had all of them memorized in his head. In his own style, he would tell me stories like The Speckled Band or The Red-Headed League and leave me with a cliffhanger every other night. He managed to make Conan Doyle's stories understandable to an 8-year-old girl, and I hung on every word. He never stopped reading until his last day. He had books, then he had a Kindle, and finally he had his Audible books. He loved autobiographical books, history books, mysteries. We shared a love for Michael Connelly's Bosch novels, and I turned him on to some of my favorite British mysteries. He liked to read the news and was always well-informed with well-thought-out opinions on the events of the day. He was a quiet intellectual. We always had something cool to talk about. I remember discussing the articles from The New Yorker that he was reading for his monthly New Yorker group. Some of you guys are here today. Dad served 2 years in Korea during the Korean conflict as a private first class in the Army. They called, he went, and I'm proud of his service. He was always hesitant to talk too much about his time there and some of the things that he saw. He always made sure his stories were the fun things they did, having a dog in their tent and a houseboy who had his own houseboy, which never made sense to me. He kept any other memories in a safe and private place, reflecting the way he lived the rest of his life. Always kind, always generous with his time to family and friends, he never met a stranger and never said a cruel word to anyone. Now I want to talk for a minute about something else my dad loves, baseball. From his time growing up in Brooklyn, going to Brooklyn Dodgers games with his dad and his brother and my Uncle Larry, to moving to New Jersey and becoming a Mets fan, and then on to Chicago, where he really had no choice but to become a Cubs fan. I thought that was kind of reluctant on his part, but he dealt with it. I think he went into every game with the expectation that they were going to lose. A lot of the time, he wasn't disappointed. When they lost, they were bums. When they won, he would say, well, they'll lose next time. For years, I would show up with my parents, Cubby's cap in hand, and those were our summer afternoons. My dad kept me safe. I always felt taken care of. But during his last years, he had wonderful carers to keep him safe. Our dear Russell and Sam made sure he was safe and comfortable, well-fed, and guys, I love you both so much. Russ became my dad's main Cubs companion, and they shared joy and frustration over wins and losses. My dad had a fondness for sweets. He could eat a couple of pieces of cake and several cookies in a day, but somehow managed never to gain a pound. My mom and I could only roll our eyes and make sure there was cake. He and Rachel had a really special relationship, very special relationship. He was one of the first people to hold her when she was born, and they always had fun together. He made the same goofy faces to her and played the same games as he did with me and Ken, and later Stephen and Ben. Rachel adored her Pop-Pop. He was the first one to take her to the top of the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier when she was very little. Every time they reached the top, they would call my mom, who was at work, because from the top they could see the big red building she worked in. They would call her, and he would tell Rachel, look at the building when talking to her, because it was like she was there with them. We spent summer afternoons at Navy Pier. We all went to the Children's Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry, and to see Mommy's dinosaur, Sue, at the Field Museum. My dad absolutely loved the trains and would lift Rachel up so she could see. The summer, our dear cousin Lori Rabson was staying with my parents. The whole crowd of us went to see the Titanic exhibit. I want to close with a poem by Robert Burns, who's never let me down in a pinch. It's called Epitaph for a Friend, and my dad was my dad, but he was also one of my best friends. So I think this is appropriate. Anyway, and I will spare you the Scots accent, although if anyone wants to come to me later, I will be happy to repeat it for you. Okay. An honest man here lies at rest, the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age, the guide of youth. Few hearts like his, with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. Much love to everyone here, and thank you all for coming in to remember my dad. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Sue. Thank you. When I was graduating high school, my dad said I needed loans to pay the tuition. We worked on paperwork together. We visited the local savings and loan, borrowed the money, paid the tuition, and I never really thought about it again until about 6 months after graduation, and I started getting these scary repayment notices. I looked at them and thought to myself, the balance was a lot lower than what I borrowed. After looking into it further, I learned that my dad had deferred the repayment until after graduation, and that he'd secretly been making monthly payments on the principal for 4 years. He never mentioned any of this to me. And that was the essence of my father. He was a generous, extremely humble, quiet, honest, totally dependable, intellectual, and profound father figure. He subtly modeled life's most important lessons for me. During many summers, he dragged me to work at his textile business. There, I would make brassiere backs, true story, Barbie doll clothes, and help maintain his buildings for hours and hours. He always broke up the long days with something fun, like a great lunch at Chick's, the bar next door, and an Italian ice from Jimmy's, who was on the other side of his building. At each stage in my life, I found myself devoting those same long hours to whatever I involved myself in, whether it was school, work, or family, and I thank him for instilling those work ethics. As I found myself dragging my own children into the city to help me maintain my apartment buildings, I also broke up those long days with terrific dinners and lunches. Well played, Dad. See where I get it, Stephen? As I reflected on what I could possibly say in just a few minutes to recognize 93 years of lifetime achievements, my thoughts and everyone else's kept returning to my dad's relationship with my mom. The way he and my mom interacted with each other and the deep friendship that they shared for 61 years truly modeled the meaning of BFF before anyone had even heard of BFF. If I absorbed just 10% of my dad's relationship skills, I think I would be leaps and bounds ahead of the general population. When I married, my dad immediately accepted and loved my late wife, Lara. There were a few unexpected surprises that turned a 4-week stay in my parents' Lincoln Park townhome basement into 4 months with our dog. My dad took it in stride, just as he took everything in stride. He smiled, peppered us with humor, and used the time to get to know both of us better. My dad loved my children, Stephen and Ben. He taught them how to play card games like gin rummy and go fish, and how to enjoy the school playground and order a hearty breakfast at Mitchell's. My dad was a cancer survivor. After hearing his diagnosis, he chose a treatment option, and he beat it and never complained once. When my late wife was diagnosed with her cancer, my father was shocked. In his typical manner, he assured all of us that we would beat it. When she passed, he was our rock, and he supported us. Later in my life, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He also faced that challenge with his usual smile and dry, quick wit. He just never complained. It wasn't in his nature. More recently, I was privileged to have my dad meet my girlfriend, Julie. During a visit, he and my mom mentioned they are having some difficulty because of COVID getting a haircut. Julie has no barber training whatsoever. Cut his hair. It was absolutely beautiful. My dad was so overjoyed that he hugged her. This was out of character for him. When I asked him about it later, he told me that he had a great fondness for Julie. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it so much. I know it's a challenge with COVID. I know people are here from home. I've received an outpouring of stories. I wish I could share them all. I can't. There is a baseball theme happening today because it was one of my dad's hugest passions. So of course I want to share a baseball story that someone shared with me. My friend Dave and I were about 10 years old. The two of us, Dave's father and my father, were driving to a Yankees game. Dave and I were in the back seat, cleverly speaking Pig Latin, ig pay atten lay for those who speak it. And we thought we were so clever. The conversation turned a little bit raunchy, and my father and the other father started speaking Pig Latin. When my friend told me that story, I was reminded of another story, kind of a classic father-son story, your first beer with your dad. It was an oppressively hot New Jersey summer. We just finished mowing the lawn. And when I say we, I just finished mowing the lawn. My dad went inside, he grabbed a Schlitz, poured half into a glass for himself, and handed me the bottle to finish it. He rarely spoke. It was his way of thanking me for the hard work. I was 12. True story. I love you, Dad. Thanks for the good times. Rest in peace.
Thank you, Sue and Ken, for those beautiful memories and stories. At least he got the numbers right. 1 and 2, just reverse them with the 12 and 21 with the beer. What a great story. In a moment, I'm going to share words from Harry's nephew, Max. But before I do, I will share a few more words from that I will share with you all. Memories that we spoke about yesterday, because I learned that Maxwell is the writer in the family, so no one will have to follow Max, in addition to, of course, Sue. So as we've heard, and we know that Barbara and Ken made their way to Chicago. It was in 1995 when she got her job here. And as we've already heard, Harry was a big supporter. It was a nice move because Ken was already living here, as was Barbara's brother and sister-in-law. Together, Harry and Barbara loved city living. Together, you'd go to the theater, opera, the Art Institute. You'd play golf, either here on your annual trips to Hilton Head. Here in Chicago, you made new friends too, at your townhouse in Lincoln Park and at the Heritage downtown. The friendships that you built were so close that even one friend back in the Lincoln Park townhome neighborhood was an ophthalmologist. I believe an ophthalmologist is an eye doctor. Well, this ophthalmologist made a house call when Harry was sick with shingles. That was true friendship, and the same was true at the Heritage. In a few moments, we'll share a poem from one of their dear friends from the Heritage as well. Barbara and Harry enjoyed travel during retirement. The two of you went everywhere together. Scandinavia, Russia, Spain, England, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, Alaska, with the entire family, and even a few cruises as well. And of course, when the grandchildren entered the picture, Harry could not have loved them more. Whether he was chasing Stephen and Benjamin around the courtyard in the Lincoln Park townhome, following some little boy mischief, or riding on the top of the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier, attending zoo lights, or ice skating with Rachel, Harry was a proud pop and grandfather. Harry, as we've heard, was a bright intellect, always learning and reading. Even as his eyesight deteriorated, he would listen to books on tape, and his memory was so very sharp. Here in Chicago, he joined a group of men who would read The New Yorker and, of course, the Torah study class with a rabbi at Kol Ami. There were so many people who cared for Harry, especially the times that he got sick or had a fall. Both his daughter-in-law, Lara, of blessed memory, was always there to help and care, and that extended to her family as well. Denise and Mabes were always available to come help with anything. Overly kind and thoughtful, and Harry and Barbara both valued your kindness and friendship. And of course, we have to give the special shout out to Harry's constant companion, who must have known it was coming as he's exiting the room, Sherlock. I was told that each night when Russell would leave and close the door, Sherlock would run straight into the bedroom, hop on the bed, there to protect Harry. And Barbara, what can we say to you today as you mourn your wreck, your BFF, your life partner, and your love? Harry was the person that you could depend on for anything and everything. Though his quiet nature sometimes bothered you a bit, he was always listening and most perceptive. Harry had his definite likes and dislikes when it came both to things and to people, but he was always honest, always genuine, humble, and unassuming. He had a love for trains, and he loved to collect and to send stamps. Recently, a dear friend of Harry's described Harry as razor sharp with a wicked sense of humor. He was a man of many talents and accomplishments. He was also a kind and gentle soul who treated those who were lucky enough to have known him with kindness, humor, and generosity. More than anything, Harry was a loving husband, father, and grandfather. In his wife, Barbara, his children, Susan and Ken, his grandchildren, Rachel, Stephen, and Ben, Harry Flaxman leaves a remarkable legacy. Going to now share words from Harry's nephew, Max, who is joining us on live stream. My Uncle Harry was 6'3" or 6'4", and yet was notably soft-spoken. He was a gentle giant who only spoke if he had something insightful to say. In stark contrast to how so many people seem to be these days, he didn't particularly enjoy hearing himself talk. Instead, he listened intently. And there was frequently a faint smile on his face that indicated that he very much appreciated what was taking place around him. In fact, I believe that one good description of Uncle Harry would be as an appreciator of things. He was a brilliant, extremely well-educated engineer, and so he liked physical objects that were well-crafted and innovative. He was highly attuned to the precision, hard work, and vision that went into creating such things. He also appreciated a good joke and had an easy laugh. With a twinkle in his eye, he told many himself. He had a wry, sly sense of humor that I always enjoyed. He was the type of person who appreciated what he had and didn't spend much time yearning for things that he didn't have. That was a reflection of the fact that for a man who possessed so much talent and intelligence, Uncle Harry was uncommonly modest. In the 53 years I knew him, I never once heard him boast or even put himself at the center of a story. And he was exceedingly kind to me and my parents and to many others. I remember, for instance, him giving me a tour of his manufacturing plant in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He showed me all of the machines, how they worked in concert with each other, and what they produced. To this day, that's been my only up-close exposure to manufacturing, and I found it fascinating, mainly because of the way that Uncle Harry explained how the plant operated, and because he took the time to make all of it understandable to a kid. People noticed all of these qualities about Uncle Harry, and so he made friends very easily. He did so most recently in his building, the Heritage at Millennium Park, where he and my Aunt Barbara enjoyed numerous close friendships. I'm very grateful to their neighbors for all of the love and concern they've shown to my aunt and uncle over the past several years. As you know, for many years, Uncle Harry battled Parkinson's disease. It took a profound toll on him, and yet he bore the burden of the illness with remarkable courage and grace. He was grateful for all of the concern and care he received, and he did not complain. Few people could endure what he did with as much dignity and poise as he displayed. I've saved for last what I believe Uncle Harry would most want people to understand about him. He was utterly devoted to his family. My grandfather was a dentist in the Buffalo area, and Uncle Harry was one of his patients. My grandfather arranged for Uncle Harry to meet his daughter, my Aunt Barbara, and thus one of the greatest love stories and marital partnerships I've ever encountered began. During 61 years of marriage, my aunt and uncle supported each other through every circumstance that life threw at them. And they did so with great joy and love and optimism. For instance, in the 1970s, my aunt decided that she wanted to learn more about the role that computers were beginning to play in business settings. She went back to school to do that, and then went on to have a very successful career in information technology. Uncle Harry encouraged it all, supported Aunt Barbara through the more stressful aspects of her career as she began to assume very senior positions, and savored all of her success. To become who she was meant to be, Aunt Barbara needed a husband exactly like Uncle Harry. He was enlightened, forward-thinking, had a great sense of perspective and proportion, and was able to help Aunt Barbara not only roll with the punches, but thrive amidst them. Also, I want to mention that when Aunt Barbara needed Uncle Harry to be generous and understanding, as her father's health failed, he was precisely those things. He helped Aunt Barbara take excellent care of my grandfather, who lived with them for extended periods in his later years. He was also a very devoted son to his mother and a thoughtful and concerned nephew to a beloved aunt. Harry was dependable and solid and always lived up to his promises. In short, he was a real mensch. But most significantly, there is this simple fact. Uncle Harry adored my Aunt Barbara. It's hard to even imagine him going through this life without her. What a beautiful and loving partnership they had. All of you saw how much they meant to each other. It was kismet. They were meant for each other. Uncle Harry also loved being a father and grandfather, and he was terrific in those roles. He was deeply devoted to my cousins and took great pride in their accomplishments. When I was growing up, the most animated I ever saw Uncle Harry was when he was discussing some activity that Kenny or Sue had decided to pursue. And I believe that Uncle Harry's influence is why my cousins both throw themselves so completely into whatever they're interested in. He didn't do things half-heartedly, and neither do they. And I believe that they experienced a whole new appreciation for him when they saw how much he doted on and how much joy he got from their children, Rachel, Stephen, and Benjamin. It was a great life Uncle Harry had, and he enjoyed it all. In the process, he taught me and others myriad lessons about integrity, fortitude, decency, modesty, resourcefulness, steadfastness, doing things the right way rather than the easy way, and most of all, love and devotion to family and friends. I loved Uncle Harry throughout my life, and I love him still for having lived a life of such dignity, decency, and thoughtfulness in such a humble, unassuming manner. If anyone has ever earned their rest, it's Harry Flaxman. And having lived a life like his, I know it's a peaceful one. Thank you, Max, for sharing those words with us here today. Now I'm going to invite Dr. Paul Herman, a dear friend and neighbor, to share a poem with us.
At peace, amado Nerva. As I gaze upon my final sunset, I salute you, life, because you never gave me false hope, no unfair labor or undeserved pain. As I walk down the final path of my fleeting life, I see I was the architect of my own destiny. When I tasted the sour and sweetness of life, it was because I placed them there. Whenever I planted roses, I always gathered roses. Certainly, after summer and fall comes the winter, but you never promised me eternal springtime. For sure, there were some nights, long nights filled with sadness. You never promised just nights of endless beauty. But some wondrous nights were filled with quiet serenity. I loved. I was loved. The sun shone on my face. Life, you owe me nothing. Life, we are at peace.
Thank you so much. We've been thinking this week about Harry and about how fitting it is that this week in our Jewish Torah reading cycle, we read the Torah portion Vayechi, which is the final Torah portion in the book of Genesis. Vayechi is the story of Jacob's death. However, Vayechi means, and he lived. How fitting it is that as we are here today remembering Harry, Vayechi, he lived. He lived a wonderful life. He lived a life devoted to family. He lived a life devoted to his passions. He lived a life of quiet humbleness and of good humor. I invite those who are able at this time to please rise as we turn to our Al Malei Rachamim prayer. Al Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtze Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim U Tahorim Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Hershel Meir, Shehalach Le'olamo, Baal Harachamim Yastirehu Beseter Kenafav Le'olamim, Bitzror Chachayim, Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, Ve'yanuach B'shalom Al Mishkavo V'nomar. Amen. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence, among the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of Harry Flaxman, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, be God's possession, and may his repose be peace. Amen. I invite you to remain standing as we turn to the back side of our pamphlet and join together in words of the mourners' Kaddish, as we stand with the immediate mourners who recite this for the first time on behalf of their father, their grandfather, their beloved husband and partner. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma divara chirute v'amlich malchute B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael Ba'gala uv'izman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah mivarach le'olam olmei almaya Yit barach v'yish tabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh v'yit hadar v'yit aleh v'yit alal shemei dekudasha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechemata damiram be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort all of those who are bereaved. So we say together, Amen.
We want to thank all of you who attended here this afternoon, and as well as the many people that have viewed the service online. And just a reminder, folks, of the folders that you received on your way in, they do have the memorial contributions information here to the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Research or to the Chicago Sinai Congregation. It has the addresses and the websites. And for those of you online, it's listed also on our webpage. The Shiva will be immediately following the service here in our chapel that's just across the hall, and our staff will escort you. Thank you.